Hey everybody, Mike from Phillips Auto here. Today's video, we're going to make dual tailpipes on a brand new 2021 Dodge Power Wagon. This truck only has 2,000 miles on it, and the customer wanted to customize it to have dual tips. So we're going to cut the exhaust off right after the factory muffler, put a splice and wire it from 3.5 inch down to dual 2.5 inch. We might have to move a few things around to make room for that exhaust coming out of the driver's side where there's never meant to be a pipe. The beginning of this exhaust job unfortunately wasn't filmed because we were in a rush and I had to have one of my other guys start it while I was working on some other projects. So I'll show you where we picked up with the filming. Let's go ahead and get the truck on the lift, show you what we got. Okay, so one annoying part about this job is the customer special ordered tips that he wants on this, and they ended up getting back ordered. He didn't want to wait to have the exhaust built. So I do know the specs of the tips. They're a 4-inch outlet, 2.5 inch inlet, and they're 14 inches long. The only way to mock up this exhaust and build it without these tips is I need to make mock-up tips. So here's what I'm going to do. Took a piece of 4-inch pipe, piece of 2.5 inch pipe. I cut the 2.5 inch pipe at 14 inches long and then hubbed it. So this is going to be a slip fit over 2.5, which is what the tips will be. They're meant to fit over a piece of 2.5. The outside diameter of the exit is going to be 4 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 of these, and then I'll have something to mock up on the truck to make the exhaust symmetrical and fit tight to the bumper and to the back of the bed, and know it's going to actually fit when the customer's tips show up and we install them at a later date. So I cut 2 rings at a 4 inch. I'm going to eyeball center these up. And I cut a couple little pieces of rod. I'm going to weld these in here to hold this ring centered. Let's go ahead and weld her up. So I'm just going to eyeball this. Now I got 2 of them on there. I'm going to bang this around a little bit and adjust my center a tad before I put that last one on. That last one's really going to pin it. See how many wrong tools I can use for this job? So obviously I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to make this nice, because in about an hour they're going to end up in the scrap bin. But there's one fake tip just for mock-up. Do one more. All right. That's ugly, but they'll work. 2 fake tips, 2.5 inch inlet, 4 inch outlet. I can use these to determine where the exhaust pipe needs to point, so when the tips do show up, they'll fit. So if you're wondering why the beginning of this job wasn't filmed, it's because this job was scheduled a couple weeks in advance, and this week ended up being one of those weeks that just turns into a complete mess. Pretty behind schedule. And I was fortunate enough that my good friend Charlie, if you don't follow him, go on Instagram, check out Metal by Charlie. He's a great friend of mine, former employee. He has his own shop now. Anyway, he stopped in to borrow one of my tools. I suckered him into starting this job for me, so he got a couple hours in on it while I was finishing up some other jobs in the shop. So everything you've seen that's already done, the Y pipe and the first couple bends, was all done by Charlie. I'm going to pick it up from here. Let's finish the passenger side first. It's going to be the easier side because there was already an exhaust system on this side. So there's not a whole lot of stuff in the way. He already has it pointing in a really nice location. I'll turn the light here on the camera. So it's pointed down real nice. There's an existing hanger here. We will take a piece of stainless rod, add a new hanger for supporting this pipe. And we need to get that pointing out in a direction that the customer wants this tip. The customer asked to have the tip pointed down at about as aggressive an angle as possible. I informed him I think about a 45 is as good as we're going to get, and also tipped out on about a 45. So that's kind of the target we're going for. So let's grab our fake tips we mocked up, hold them up there and see how it looks. But we're pretty much going to have this pipe come out and hug this frame as tight as possible and then tip down. Since those tips the customer ordered are 14 inches long, could have got away with something that's like 6 inches long. So 14 inches long, that's like the entire height of the underside of this. If you want that to point down at all, it's just going to turn into a mess. But we don't have time to get something different. We're going to mock this up for what he got, and it's going to be what it's going to be. You should always leave ordering parts up to the professionals, because whenever the customers get their own stuff, it's a disaster. Customers don't know what they're doing. That's why they pay us to do our job. So let's get this figured out. He'd like it to exit between here and here. He doesn't want to see much of the tip. What he requested actually was the tip to point to the ground, which is interesting. And he didn't want to see the tip. So you have a 14-inch long tip and he wants it to point straight down. We're about 4 inches higher than the frame, so that's not going to happen. To get this beneath the frame and to not have this sticking out, it pretty much needs to be about that angle, not perpendicular to the ground. So a 45 is already pushing the luck. We need it to tip out as well. So you can't have the pipe come under the frame and then go up and then within a 2-inch distance come back down and hit the tip. It's just not possible, and it's just insanely ridiculous. So without talking too much trash on customers, this thing isn't going to be even close to what the customer wants. That's about what he's going to get right there, and that's just how it's going to be. So I'm going to get my angle finder and I'm going to measure the angle between the existing pipe and the angle of the tip in order to figure out what our next bend needs to be. Use this angle finder here, put it on the bottom of that pipe, get the other half of the angle finder pointing at this pipe, and about that. So we need a 26 degree bend. And I'm probably gonna have to roll it to get this pipe in the direction of where I want it. So that's the angle. I can get about that much of an angle on it and still pass this frame. So I'm gonna have to do a return bend. Let's get this return bend first. I can go that far and miss the frame. Sometimes it's easier to have two people here to hold all these pipes up. So if I do that, I will have to cut that other pipe shorter. Okay, so I'm going to put a 32-degree bend there, and with a 32-degree bend there, I'm going to need, let me grab measuring tape. Alright, it's always fun to try to measure all those by yourself. Okay, so that's about the angle. And I'm going to need to add about 10 inches of pipe. Past that bend should be enough. I'll end up cutting it off. 10 inches plus that, so 16 inches. I need a piece of 16-inch long pipe with a 32-degree bend on the end of it. That's going to simulate this coming up, turning just under the frame and getting up to this other piece of pipe. From there, I'll measure the angle between these two and cut it shorter so that I can slice in a mandrel bend. Okay, so we're slicing and dicing some old mandrel bends to use up on this job. So we need a bend that is 32 degrees. So my angle finder here set at 32 degrees. Now the easiest way to determine where to cut this bend is, if you think about it, this is 0, okay? This is coming up at 32 degrees, all right? Now any tangent point coming off of this line parallel to the table equals 32 degrees. So if you imagine a straight piece of pipe coming off of this, and you laid this on the bench, say that piece of pipe was coming off of this, and you rocked it back till that hit, and you have this on the table, right? If you slide this back, once you slide this back and you make it so that the back side of this angle finder lines up with this pipe, that point of intersection is the point where this bend becomes 32 degrees. So I'll make a very elaborate video about this entire measuring process. You can find that on my channel at a later date. If it's not already up, do a quick search for that. But this is the easiest way to do it. So get your Sharpie ready to rock. Pipe on the bench. Imagine this being a straight line coming off. This is set to 32 degrees. I'm going to slide this back while holding this correctly. I'm going to slide this back until the back side of this pipe lines up with this angle finder. And it's hard to do with one hand holding the pipe, but that point of intersection is right there. Bring that flat, bring this back. I'm actually going to adjust that line just a hair. Okay, so right there, from there to there, and make sure you draw your line through the center line of the bend. So you gotta look straight at it. So that, from here to there, is 32 degrees of a bend. Hope that makes sense. Like I said, I will have a video just on that. I'll do it on a bigger bend so you can really see it well. Get the camera set up very nicely so you can really see what I'm doing. I'll do a couple different demonstrations, so check for that on my channel, how to map out how to mark a mandrel bend. So I prefer to cut all my mandrel bends with a band saw. Can get a little shady. Gotta hold on to it with a death grip. Trick is, once you get almost through, Don't try to break it through all the way. Roll the pipe in. Roll the cut up to the top. As you come through, the bandsaw is always trying to pull the material down to the table. So if the cut is actually happening up here, not down at the table, it's trying to rip that down and rip it out of your hands, and it can become very dangerous. So the key is slice through. The initial start, it's going to keep trying to pull it down. When you have a full U or like an over 90, it can't pull it down just because it can't rotate that 90 down into the table. It's a lot more dangerous when you're cutting a piece of straight pipe, because that initial cut is trying to pull the pipe out of your hand. But anyway, once you get it started, it'll go through nice and easy, but when you try to break through that back side, it tries to rip it out of your hand. So the key is bring the cut up to the top. Get through to the end, and then roll that up into the pipe and let it break through at the top, and it'll break through nice and calmly and not try to rip the material out of your hands. If you're ever trying to cut a sliver off the very edge of the pipe, never hold that with your fingers for obvious reasons. This is a very dangerous machine. You will lose that finger. I like to take a pair of vice grips and just nip the edge. Use the vice grips as a handle, and I can then roll the pipe in or feed the pipe through, holding onto the vice grips and not trying to hold onto the small piece. So even something like this, I might grab it with 2 pairs of vice grips, here and here, have the vice grips in my hands, push it through, and roll that last bit up into the blade for the breakthrough. Let's just do a quick check to make sure this even looks right. So I want this pipe to come down and then run almost parallel to the ground. It's going to be a little low because I didn't cut that other pipe yet, but it looks about right. So I'm going to go ahead and get these tacked together. And then what I'll do is I'll figure out how far it's too low sneaking under the frame. And I'll have to cut this other pipe up in order to raise this up. Then we'll figure out that last bend to point towards the tip. Okay, so let's get this tacked together. Now whenever I'm welding stainless, I always back flux with Solar B. So I've got some Solar B mixed up here. Since this is just a standard exhaust system, I solely use Solar B flux, and I don't back purge the final weld. It's really unnecessary on something like this. When I'm building headers or something that's going to be polished out on both sides, or aircraft exhaust, I will back purge the final weld, but I always flux the tack ups with Solar B. You can't really back purge a tack up on the vehicle or in the jig. There's just too many leaks and things like that. It's a huge waste of gas and it's not going to work well. So always Solar B flux the inside for tack ups no matter what. For just an exhaust system on something standard, the Solar B is good enough for final welding. No full back purge is necessary. On things that have extreme heat fluctuations, hot and cold, like headers, turbo manifold, things like that, aircraft exhaust, always back purge your final weld. If it's something that's going to be polished inside and out, like a stainless steel countertop, a box or a pan where the inside is just as functional as the outside, you can purge that But a box or a pan or a countertop is also very hard to back purge, so that's where the Solar B really comes in and helps fill in that gap where the back purging is not going to be that great. In all reality, the Solar B is more than sufficient on its own, but on the high temperature fluctuating parts like a set of headers, fully back purge your piping. It's very important to make sure that that weld integrity is flawless inside and out. Let's go ahead and get this tacked. We'll tack this in a couple spots. At least 3 different locations to pin it. From moving in any direction. So that's going to fit just like that. Now we're going to roll it to point in the right direction. So the main thing I need to know now is what's the distance between this pipe and this frame rail. I want to get this up higher like that. So I need to try to figure out where I want to cut this other pipe. So if I lay that next to it and slide it up, it looks like if I cut it right about there, it's going to put me where I want to be. So I need to get this entire section down off the vehicle and slice that off. Then I can put this up, roll it to the right spot, put some slash marks on it so I know where to tack it, take it back down, tack it on the bench, put it back up for a test fit. Let's go ahead and get all that done. This isn't welded in yet, which is good. I don't have to take the whole thing off. I thought Charlie had that tacked already, so let's go ahead and get this cut. My marks right here. We'll go slice that off in the bandsaw. And get that rolled back pointing into the center of that open hole there. We'll put a mark, a slash mark between these pipes and put an indicator of how far it's slid in so I can make that repeatable going in and out and make sure I'm always putting it in the same spot. And line up these cuts. Get this pipe running under the frame and roll it so that I've pointed where I want it to exit. And put some indicator marks. I'll show you what I mean about these indicator marks when I take it down. So you'll see there are 3 marks on that pipe. And where am I here? 3 marks on that pipe. So basically we want to line those up to weld it. Let's go get a couple tacks on here. At this stage it's really important to only put a couple very light tacks that you could break apart if you wanted to, but strong enough that if you drop this on the ground they won't break. So don't final weld this yet. There's a lot of fitting still to do. We might end up moving things. Something you'll learn over time is not to over tack things until you're confident it's exactly right, because if you're a good welder, there's nothing worse than having to cut apart your tack. Okay. Now for the fun part, trying to hold this all lined up. Trying to tack it. So I'll hold it with one hand and I'll try to get a nice fusion tack right there without burning myself. Helmet on. Get my 3 marks lined up. Okay, real quick, just one tack. And I'm going to go on the other side, do a quick tack. And I'll do a third one here on the back side. Alright, now remember on this end we have an indicator for how deep it was in that slip. We also have 2 hash marks to line up the orientation of the roll. So we'll put it right back to where we had it, which was there and there. Okay, we got a little weight hanging now, so it's trying to sag. So gotta keep that in mind. In fact, I'm gonna go grab an exhaust stand to hold this weight up. And we're still pointing where we need to be. All right, so the pipe comes out, it splits, comes down and around. It's nice and tight to the frame here. There's about an inch gap between the frame and the pipe. And we are pointing right into the opening. So now we need to figure out the bend to get the tip angled down at the degree we want, and then figure out where to cut this. It's probably gonna end up getting cut back a little bit. We have our mock-up tip. So basically we can hold this tip at the angle we want and then measure the angle between these 2 pipes. Then cut a mandrel bend, put a short extension on the mandrel bend facing the exit, and then we'll figure out where to cut this back at to get the tip up where we want it. Because right now it's a little long, it's close. By the time we add that bend on there, it's going to be out too far. So let's measure that angle. So if I have it just past that edge, we can figure out this angle here. Is a 23 degree bend. So at 23 degrees, it's going to come out like that. It's not exactly what the customer wants, but any more of an aggressive angle puts the tip too low. Any less of an angle puts the tip up behind the bumper. So since he bought 14-inch long tips, that's pretty much all we can do. Because just if you drew a straight line from the bottom of the frame to the bottom of the bumper, that's the angle we have to run. We don't have another option. If I took a long straight edge, I put it on the bottom of this frame, and I ran it and touched the bottom of the bumper, that degree is 23 degrees. So a straight shot, 23 degrees. Anything more aggressive than that puts the pipe in the frame or above the frame. Anything less than that will put the tip up behind the bumper. So we're stuck with 23 degrees. We can't do anything else. If the tip was significantly shorter, then we could come out and angle down and have a 6-inch tip come down at a pretty good angle. But since the tips are 14 inches long, we don't have much of an option because the distance between the inside of the bumper and the frame rail is about 14 inches. So we don't have a lot of choices here. So the next thing is I'm going to go mark out a 23-degree bend, get that trimmed up. If you have a hard time figuring out where this is, I would take a machinist square, something heavy, where you can lay that up against it. Then you know you're parallel to the table. Come back, 23 degrees, find that tangent point. Okay. So that's it there. It's that shorter one. Look straight down on it, mark out your bend. Coming right through the center line. Get rid of this other mark that was wrong. So this is a pretty small bend. So there's not a whole lot of pipe we're cutting off here, but that is 23 degrees. Okay, same as always, light tacks. That tack pulled that a little bit on me. Basically, I'm going to cut it knowing that it's still too long. I'm going to mark this a little long. You can always cut it again. I don't want to have to add metal back on. So I've got this marked. I'm going to take this down. I'm going to cut it on the bandsaw, put it back in, see where we end up, see if it brings that tip into our target. That's where the tip is going to exit. So that's enough room that the plastic in the bottom of that bumper is not going to melt. So I'm fairly happy with that. We'll go ahead and tack up these last two pipes. Again, just loosely tacked. And then we'll come back and do a final mock-up. Make sure we like everything before welding anything solid. Alright, let's get these fluxed. The flux wet again. The inside of this fluxed up nice. The acetone that's in this flux dries really fast, so just about every time you come back to the bench, re-add a little bit of acetone to re-wet it. And if you add too much and it gets too runny, then just wait a minute, let it dry a little bit. You want the consistency of like mud. Okay, now I'm going to intentionally only put 2 tacks close together on this last joint, because this last joint is very important that it's lined up just right for that tip to exit where we want it to be. So if I leave it just 2 tacks and they're close together on the same side, I can gently tweak and manipulate that fitment to get it just right before I come over here and pin it with that 3rd tack. I can make a fine adjustment right now by tweaking them tacks around, make sure it's just right, come back over here and do that last tack. Alright, let's get this back in here. Line up those marks. Get that stand ready. Get our fake tip. Put that tip right where we want it. I'm going to get a light on there for you guys. So that's how the tip will exit when there's an actual tip on there. That's just the mock-up tip. Hold the camera as if you're standing above the truck's on the ground. You can see that the tip will just barely stick out there. It just sticks out past the body. You see there's just a finger gap right there that won't melt the bumper. That should work out nicely. All right, I'm going to pull that down and put some heavier tacks on all these pipes. I'm not going to finish weld anything just yet. Alright, so let's go ahead and get some better tack welds on this thing. I brought the entire pipe over, including the Y section. Okay, so I'll show you what I did. Just a few stitch welds, little 1/2 inch long welds, little 1 inch long welds throughout the system. Keep this thing from being able to move around. Now while I have this down right now, I'm going to do the dreaded part of welding this collector together. Getting down in here is never fun. Lots of tungsten stick out. We'll get down there and fuse that up, make sure it doesn't leak. See all those welds? Alright, got the one side up out of the corner. Try to get down to the other side. Luckily the material jumped, the puddle jumped to the other side fairly easily. Nothing worse than trying to weld down in a corner like this, and instead of the puddle jumping, it tries to burn back on you and open up. That becomes a problem real quick. Actually, I'm going to give a little more stick out. See if I get down there a little deeper before I flip it over. Alright, let's flip it over, see if we can get to the other side and connect the dots. Okay, so off camera, I test fit this on the vehicle, made sure nothing moved, everything still fits really nice. I'm happy with it, so I'm going to final weld all these seams. So now that's fully welded and installed back on the car, this was our starter piece of the other tailpipe. I'm going to weld a stick of straight onto it so then I can map out the next bend. Remember, light tacks, you might need to get this apart. Okay, so let's see how this fits. Got an extension put onto the initial bend, just to get some length going towards the frame. Get that rolled up nice and tight, about the same distance between the top of the pipe and the frame as the other side. Now, this is running pretty close to some wiring back here. We're going to have to address that a little bit. You can probably pop it out of the clips and move it a little bit. Okay, I like it right there. Let's see how that looks from the outside. So we've got that bend comes around. There's the hub. There's the extension we just put on. Get this pointing out past the frame. Pointing in the general direction of where we want to be. So I'm concerned about a little bit about this wiring, not so much. There's a pretty good gap here, but this is very close. It loops down and goes back up. We could probably pop these clips out, reroute that harness a little bit, get that up higher, and move these to the other side. Gives a couple more inches there, but that should be plenty of room. There's a good like 6 inches there. All right, let's map out this next bend. So now this is always the worst part of the job, is trying to make everything 100% symmetrical, making this look exactly the same from the rear view and from the side view. Most people say, oh, you can only see one side of the vehicle at the same time, but the rear view of this vehicle, if you're driving behind this guy, you're going to see these tips, these tailpipes coming down. So if they look different, it's going to look really stupid. So. And it looks really close. This is where we need an extra set of hands. Someone to hold this pipe up at the angle. Someone to stand back 20 feet. Take an eyeball at it. This looks about right. It just needs to be shortened up and then rolled out a hair. Alright, so I got a second set of hands, and it turns out my bend was the correct degree. That I already had cut, 16 degrees. We were able to hold it up and then put the hash marks on there. So I'm going to line these up, get this tacked together, give it a test fit. We can stand back and admire it and make sure everything looks great. When I first started using this Solar B flux, I was kind of reluctant. I didn't trust it to do a good enough job. But I have since cut open some things that I have fully welded with nothing but Solar B flux, and found the weld inside was absolutely beautiful. So I'm sold on it. Get a quick tack. That slid on, roll that up nice and tight. Gonna need a stand. Got some weight to it now. And let's test fit our tip. Compare it to the other side. pretty darn close. We'll take some final measurements off some reference points, tweak it a little bit, and then make the hangers. Okay, so next we need to make the hanger. There are some threaded holes right there. They are 12mm by 1.5 thread. And we're going to use one of these style hangers. I keep these in stock. I like these a lot. So that hole is not big enough to fit a 12mm through, so we're going to have to drill that out. But basically we are going to bolt that sucker right there. It drops down, lays right on the edge of the pipe. We'll cut that off and weld it on. Okay, so we need to put a 12mm bolt through here without actually measuring anything. Obviously 12 is just smaller than 13, and 13 is very close to 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to put a 1/2 inch hole in this. And I know that that 12mm bolt will fit through there nice and sweet. Alright, nothing pretty, just need to open it up. Okay, so I got 2 marks on here. Cut mark, bend mark, and then you'll see a line going this way. That is the roll of the rod in which I want to bend this around. So that's the back side, the dead back of the rod when I bend it around the pipe. So I'm not going to cut it yet. I'm going to need that extra length to hold this. I'm going to roll this back so that the line on the back side is parallel to the ground. This is stainless rod, so it's extremely difficult to bend. So we're going to use a little heat. It's always going to bend at the hottest point, so you can make a nice sweeping arc by letting parts cool down and then heating up the spot you want the bend to be at. Try to visualize the outside radius of that 2.5 inch pipe. Trying to get a similar curve to this rod. Okay, it's probably pretty close. Now I know my cut mark is right at the edge of the vise. So even though it burned off, I know where it was. Okay, let's go cool that off and give it a test fit. I can't weld this on yet because it lands on the pipe right at a spot where there's actually a weld seam in the tube. So I need to get the tube welded up first. You can see how that angle that I put on there is pretty much the exact radius of the pipe. So let's take this pipe down. I need to weld this seam as well as the one up here. Then I can put it back up, line everything up, tack this to the pipe, then take it down and weld both these hangers on, left and right tailpipes, 100%. All right, let's burn in these last couple welds here. So we want to make these look fairly presentable, but this is not a show car. This is not some Ferrari restoration or some rare piece. This is literally on some guy's work truck. He just wanted to have that dual exhaust look. So we're not super sweating these welds being cosmetically beautiful. It is a pickup truck. It'll be on the job site, hauling material. And you can always say, well, you know, anything worth doing is worth doing right. Yeah, that's true to a point, but this customer is not going to pay the extra hours and hours and hours of labor to sit here and nitpick every little stupid detail on his work truck. In fact, he didn't even want stainless. He wanted me to just bend this up on the regular old exhaust bender with standard steel pipe. Something you typically get at like a, you know, Meineke or a generic exhaust shop. But in order to accomplish some of the bends I needed, and some of the bend radiuses I needed, center lines, Mandrel bends were really beneficial, which is why we are building this out of literally leftover pieces I had laying around the shop. So he's getting stainless for a non-stainless price, simply because it made my life easier and I had all this stuff laying around. I didn't have to buy any brand new Mandrel bends to get this job done. These are all cut-offs, leftovers, stuff like that. So I told him I can give him this stuff for real cheap. It was a lot easier to get that Y pipe in there using a stainless collector and making it out of regular exhaust pipe. It saved a lot of time. By the time we got that Y pipe in there and made the first couple bends to get past the spare tire, there wasn't a whole lot more length to go. It would have been silly to convert it from stainless back to mild steel just to go another 10 inches. I decided to just keep it stainless the whole way, and I had enough stuff laying around to do it. Okay, so that one's welded. Do a quick inspection. I didn't skip any spots. Looks good. Okay. I'm welding this right now with the pulse setting on. I don't typically weld stainless with pulse on. I started welding this job, and the last thing I used the welder for was aluminum. I always weld aluminum with pulse on. And when I started welding the system here and the pulse setting was still turned on, I decided to just run with it. Why not? Doesn't hurt. If you are trying to do really beautiful welds, pulse is a nice feature. You get some consistency in your dimes. My preferred pulse setting is 2 pulses per second. That's what I like to run on the aluminum. Timing just works out good with 2 pulses per second. Anything slower than that, the travel speed's a little too low. Anything higher than that is obnoxious to listen to. Of course, you can weld aluminum just fine without pulse. I did for many years. Once you get used to using pulse on AC TIG, it's really nice. Okay, 2 good tack welds. That should stay there. Good. Let's take it down and finish weld it. Get this hanger welded on all the way. Okay, this pipe is done. Let's pull the other one off and weld the hanger on that one. Alright, so there it is, all the pieces for dual exhaust tips on a 2021 Dodge Ram Power Wagon. I used some ceramic paint and painted the beginning of this pipe where we reused some of the factory mild steel. Let's go ahead and hang it on the truck, clamp it tight, put the truck on the ground, check it out. That's up there, hanger's installed. Now before I put this other tailpipe on, I need to move some wiring around a little bit to get it away from the heat. So my main concern here is this loop that comes down. Comes up over that cross rail, comes down, has a clip, and then goes up over the next cross rail. These wires for the rear come out of it, plug in here. So I think I'm going to reroute this stuff. So instead of coming up over the top, it comes down around the back, which will get it kind of this way, come around. And that'll give me room to pop this clip out and get this harness up. There's another clip here. Get it up much higher. Maybe I can use that bolt hole there to make a mounting point to hold it up out of the way even. The exhaust comes right underneath it. It's a little close. I just want to get this up like that. Even higher would be better. So I've just about got that harness rerouted. I whipped up this little angle bracket with 2 1/2-inch holes. I'm going to utilize another one of those threaded holes in the frame to bolt this bracket to the frame and give me a tie back point for that harness to hold it back out of the way. I'll show you what I mean when it's all mounted up. So I have all the wiring rerouted. I pulled this back and pulled it around the bottom side instead of up over the top, and then tied it along the front side of this vent tube instead of the back. I popped the harness out of these clips, and then I made this bracket right there. It gives me a tie back point for the harness using a nice jumbo size industrial wire tie. Then I sprayed a little black paint on it afterwards. Keep it from starting to rust. So now that harness is way up out of the way. Make sure it's not going to rub on anything. Everything looks really good. It'll be happy to sit there forever and never become a problem. Slid on all the way. Get the bolt in this hanger. Once the tip's on here, I can still roll this pipe a little bit before I put the clamp on here at the hub. Yep, so that definitely needs to get rolled up. I know there's a finger width gap there. The center of this pipe is the center of that corner. So right there looks really good. Like that. Now I can tighten that hanger up. Definitely moved a little when I tightened it. There is a little bit of wiggle room in the tip, but when you tighten that tip, it's going to center where it wants to go. So you need to really make sure you're close to perfect. But I like that. Looks good. Plenty of room now on that wiring. I'll show you what I mean. Looks great. It's a good heavy inch, a good hand width away from the spare tire. Shouldn't become a problem at all with heat on that tire. All right, looks really good. I got to put the band clamp on this hub. I'll show you how this wiring came out. Just about wrapped up. So you can see that wiring is nowhere near the heat anymore. So I'm real happy with that. That'll be good. So we got to put the band clamp on this separation. Almost done, finally. I'm going to center that up so the center of that clamp is about the center of that hub. I'm going to clock that in a direction where I can get impact gun on it. Alright, so everything's tight. The tips don't sit exactly perfect because they're not clamped at all, because it's not leaving with these tips on. He will take it home with no tips. He'll just dump out the corners. When the real tips come in, the customer can put them on himself. Let's take a look at what we got. So starting at the original muffler, we sliced it off. We reused that 3.5 inch hub. We took a bunch of meat out of this bend. That factory bend used to be all the way down here. Took some meat out of it, slid it back, welded it back to the hub. We reused that bend going up. We got an adapter, knocking 3.5 down into 2 2.5s. One goes left, one goes right. We got a slip clamp there so it can come apart. On this side it comes down. 2 bends, utilized the factory hanger location and our mock-up tip. So that will be a rolled edge black, nice looking tip when they come in. On this side, we've got the pipe coming down. We rerouted the wiring away from the heat. 2 bends. Got us out on this side. Mock-up tip on this side as well. Again, temporary. Made a hanger utilizing that threaded hole in the frame. Came down, welded it to the pipe. So finally we can put this truck on the ground, see what it looks like, and see what it sounds like without that factory resonator on the back. So from behind the vehicle, you can just barely see a hint of tip sticking down. If we get down on our knees level with the vehicle, you can barely see that 4-inch section showing. Come in parallel to the bumper. It's just sticking out. That right there is about the height parallel, so you can barely see that tip sticking down. Side shot. down on our knees, parallel. You can barely see a hint of tip sticking through there. Turn this light on, it might help you. Maybe not. So that's down at looking perfectly straight in from the side. This is what you see, face height, looking down. You can barely see it showing. It's going to look real nice when the final tips are on there. From in the wheel well, you can just see the pipe popping through. Let's take a look at the other side. Looks fairly similar and symmetrical from this side of the vehicle. If the customer wants, I'll give them a suggestion. We can even paint that pipe with high temp black to make it basically just blend in with the frame and hide it completely. So once these tips come in, it's going to change the look of it completely. But basically the customer wanted the tips to just barely show and basically be hidden. But when it's running, he wanted it obvious that it was exhaust coming out of both corners. Brand new truck, 2021. Hasn't even had its first oil change yet. Let's fire it up and hear how it sounds. I'm sure the microphone on this GoPro doesn't do that justice. It's got a little more groan than factory for sure. Sounds good. Definitely doesn't sound stock, but at the same time, it's not obnoxious either. I like it. So let's check it out, see how this looks in the sunlight. Tips hang down, just show a little bit. It's going to look real nice once the real tips are on there. This new 2021 Power Wagon's a pretty nice truck. I'm not a Dodge guy by any means, but I like this thing. It rides pretty nice. It's clean. The interior is really nice. It's a pretty sweet ride. So I really hope you enjoyed watching this video on how to make dual tailpipes on a 2021 Dodge Power Wagon. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up and follow along. And check out my other channel as well. I'll leave a link in the description. Thank you.